Now, the grand design opened, and this intrigued me, with a list of the big questions that people have always asked. How does the universe behave? What is the nature of reality? Where did all this come from? Did the universe need a creator? And I thought, this is going to be very interesting. Hawking is now going to treat these philosophical questions with rigor. Well, I got a shock, because Hawking at once dismisses philosophy. He lists his questions, and then he says, traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy is dead. It is not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly in physics. And as a result, scientists have become the bearers of the torch of discovery in our quest for knowledge. Well, I was startled by this, to say the least, because, of course, his questions are all philosophical questions. His statement about philosophy is dead, is itself a philosophical statement. It's certainly not a statement of science. It is a metaphysical statement. And therefore, because his statement claims that philosophy is dead, when I then read that his book is all about philosophy, I get slightly disturbed that there's a bit of basic and fundamental lack of understanding behind it. But let's have a look at the logic, because the major conclusion of Hawking's book is this: because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Now, when I read that sentence, I thought, what? And then I read it again, and then I read it again, and then I spent many hours thinking about it, because this is the central conclusion and statement of the book. Well, the first obvious question to ask is, what does Hawking mean by nothing? Because his assumption, because there is a law of gravity, seems to be postulating there is something. The law of gravity certainly isn't nothing. And if he believes in a law of gravity that's prior in some sense, I presume he believes in gravity, because the existence of a law on its own without the thing it's describing would be essentially vacuous. I'll return to that in a moment. But the main point at the first level of logical analysis of this conclusion is that gravity, or a law of gravity, is not nothing. That is, if Hawking is using the word in its usual sense, philosophically correct, that is, of non-being. Now, if he isn't, he should have told us. So it appears, at first sight at least, that Hawking is simultaneously asserting that the universe is both created from nothing and from something, which is not a very promising start. Now, of course, I'm well aware that often when physicists speak about nothing, they don't mean nothing at all. They mean a quantum vacuum, which is manifestly not nothing, and Hawking alludes to it later in the book. I'm tempted to say, ladies and gentlemen, that all of this is a little bit too much ado about nothing. Now, the situation doesn't improve when we move to the logic of the second part of his statement. The universe can and will create itself. Now, if we say X creates Y, the meaning of those words are that we presuppose the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. That's a simple matter of the meaning of the words. So if I say X now creates X, it means I'm presupposing the existence of X to explain the existence of X, which is, of course, logically incoherent, even if we set X equal to the universe, which is precisely what Hawking does at this point. And to presuppose the existence of the universe to account for its own existence, to my mind, is something out of Alice in Wonderland, not out of science. Now, it's very seldom in my experience to find two distinct levels of contradiction in a single sentence, but Hawking seems to have invented a sentence with three separate levels of contradiction. He says that the universe comes from a nothing that turns out to be something, self-contradiction number one. Then he says the universe creates itself, self-contradiction number two. But that's not all. His notion that a law of gravity explains the existence of the universe is also self-contradictory, since a law of nature by definition surely depends for its own existence on the prior existence of the nature that it purports to describe. So the main conclusion of this much vaunted book appears to be a triple self-contradiction. Philosophers, my philosophical friends, have been tempted to say, that is what comes of saying that philosophy is dead. And I want to say that it simply shows that nonsense remains nonsense even when it's talked about by world-famous scientists. And what serves to obscure the illogicality of such statements is the fact that they are made by famous scientists, and the general public, not surprisingly, assumes that they are statements of science. But I was glad that I learned early on in life that not every statement by a scientist is a statement of science. And any statement, whether made by a scientist or not, should be open to logical analysis. Immense prestige and authority does not compensate for faulty logic. Now, what I find extremely worrying about all of this is that this illogical notion is not some peripheral point in the grand design. It appears to be the key argument. And if the key argument is invalid, in one sense, there's very little left to say. However, since gravity, the law of gravity, plays such a signal role in Hawking's argument, I want to pursue this a little more because I'm rather concerned of the impression the book gives as to the nature of physical law. And we shall see that as it comes. But let me go back, because I promised I would, to deal with this category mistake that's very common with Richard Dawkins, with whom I've debated the matter, and now Hawking. And that is to offer people a choice between God and, in Hawking's case, the laws of physics. Talking about M theory, his chosen candidate for a final unifying theory of physics, he said, it predicts that a great many universes were created out of nothing. Their creation does not require the intervention of some supernatural being or God. Rather, they arise naturally from physical law. That's an extremely interesting statement to me. And it's quite clear what the shift is here. Hawking is dismissing that notion and replacing it by the idea that creative power is possessed by physical law. But physical law is not an agent. Hawking is confusing, in a classical category mistake, two completely different kinds of entity, physical law and personal agency. So the choice that he sets before us is between false alternatives. To put it another way, he's confused two levels of explanation. God is an explanation of the universe, but not the same kind of explanation as you will get from physics. Now, it's very easy to see this. Suppose I replace the universe by a jet engine, and then we're asked to explain it. And suppose I say to you, I want to give you two choices to explain this jet engine. Choice number one is physical law, the laws of physics, and a bit of engineering, if you like. And choice number two is Sir Frank Whittle. Choose. Well, that's foolish. Because in order to give a complete description of the jet engine, in terms of both its function and its origin, you need both. You need an explanation in terms of law and engineering, and you need an explanation in terms of the agent who invented it. They don't compete, nor do they conflict. They are distinct levels. And therefore, it is very strange to find Dawkins and Hawking making what a philosophy 101 student could see to be a classical category mistake, which incidentally was not made by Sir Isaac Newton when he discovered the law of gravitation. He didn't say, now I understand I've got a law of gravitation, therefore I don't need God. Not at all. He did the exact opposite. He wrote one of the most brilliant books in the history of science, the Principia Mathematica, expressing the hope that it would, I quote, persuade the thinking man to. In other words, we're back to what I said earlier. The more that Newton understood, the more he admired the genius of God who was behind it. But it's even more interesting than that, at least I find it is. Because the laws of physics can explain how the jet engine works. They can't explain how it came to exist in the first place. It's self-evident it couldn't have been created by the laws of physics on their own. It needed Sir Frank Whittle. But even that's not enough. The laws of physics plus Frank Whittle could not actually produce a jet engine on their own. There also needed to be some material stuff around the place. Matter may be humble stuff, but it isn't produced by laws. Now, of course, the example can help clear up another confusion. Science, according to many scientists, concentrates essentially on material causation. It asks the how questions, how does the jet engine work? It also asks the why questions concerning function. Why is this microprocessor here and why is that pipe there? But it doesn't answer the why questions of purpose. So that if I'm giving a scientific account of a jet engine, I may not mention Sir Frank Whittle. But I'm giving only a partial account. I'm giving an explanation at the level of material causation, but I'm not giving a full explanation. It requires the agency as well. It would be utterly ridiculous to deduce from a complete physical explanation of a jet engine that Frank Whittle didn't exist. And yet it seems to me that that's what many scientists and others do with God. They define the range of questions which science is permitted to ask in such a way that God is excluded from the start, and then they say that God's unnecessary. But ladies and gentlemen, if I design a machine in the physics lab that can only see physical light, I can't then say that my machine doesn't detect X-rays, so therefore they don't exist. We need to examine the grid, the matrix of questions that appear, and to see if they grasp everything or not. They fail to see, I would submit to you, rather provocatively perhaps, that it's not their science, but their atheistic worldview that excludes God. Now, I have observed in life, perhaps you've noticed it, that scientists didn't put the universe there. But neither did their theories, nor the laws of mathematical physics. And yet, much as I find it hard to believe, Hawking seems to think they did. There's a program in this country, I believe, called Larry King Live. I don't watch it very often, but I did watch it when Hawking was on it. And when he was asked where gravity came from and so on, he said M theory. In other words, gravity has its origin in a theory. I thought for a moment, that's a very curious notion of what a theory is. Scientists expect to develop theories involving mathematical laws to describe natural phenomena, which enable them to make predictions, and they've done it with spectacular success. But on their own, theories and laws cannot create those phenomena. They are descriptions, usually mathematical, of what normally happens under certain given conditions. And what's more, this is totally obvious from the examples Hawking himself gives in his book. In order to make it accessible to ordinary people, he gives his first example of physical law. It is this: the sun rises in the east. That's a physical law. But this law doesn't create the sun, nor the planet Earth with east and west.